Heroin. Heroin. Yeah, Ohio's been hit hard. So here's my question. Will you cut off the source? Yes, we'll cut off the source. Build the wall. We'll cut off the source. Good question. Thank you. 4 a.m. Columbus, Ohio. A hospital sits in near total darkness, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the building is holding its breath. Somewhere inside, doors are locked that shouldn't be. Cameras watch hallways that no one mentions. A director who spent years earning trust is now being watched in silence by people who don't announce themselves. For years, something poisonous lived behind those walls, not in the parking lot, not on a street corner, not in a back alley. It moved through the place under the cover of routine. Deliveries, supply carts, sealed containers marked medical, and tucked inside shipments that looked legitimate. An opioid more deadly than most people can imagine, fentanyl traveled through the same corridors meant for healing. Operating rooms were secured after hours. Storage areas stayed colder than necessary. Paperwork appeared clean, even polished. But patients disappeared into the system and didn't come out the way families expected if they came out at all. Rumors spread quietly. Unusual transfers, delayed reports, missing records, a sense that the hospital's night shift had its own rules. Investigators would later suspect the worst. Narcotics, hidden on site, organs diverted through restricted storage, and deaths that didn't feel accidental. For nearly 9 years, the allegations hung in the air like a low, invisible fog until the morning the agents finally walked in and the fog turned into evidence. If you want the full breakdown of the investigation, the chain of events, and how this operation allegedly stayed hidden for so long, engage with the story so it reaches more people. Because what happened here wasn't just corruption. It was betrayal in a place that's supposed to be sacred. We keep focusing on the dealers and wasting time, a voice says. Just remember that. We're wasting our time. And that toughness includes the death penalty. Then the details get worse. 12 kilograms of fentanyl, not a personal stash, not a quick profit move, hidden inside a hospital safe. And not in a random closet, either. This safe, investigators allege, was controlled by someone at the very top. A person trusted with vulnerable patients, the elderly, the sick people who can't advocate for themselves when things go wrong. This wasn't danger creeping in from outside. This was something that allegedly wore authority like a uniform. A medical environment turned into a controlled zone, a place where access could be granted or denied, where records could be adjusted, where questions could be redirected, where a person could vanish into procedures and protocols and never return the same. Some of the worst people on earth and illicit drugs decimated American communities, another voice says, framing it as a national crisis. Massive, sprawling, relentless. 4:20 a.m. The hospital's private lot is still. Only a handful of lights burn above the entrance. Then the stillness snaps. FBI and DEA agents move in fast, coordinated, practiced. Their commands are sharp, their footsteps loud against polished floors. Radios crackle. The calm, clinical quiet turns tense in seconds. The way it does when a place meant for comfort suddenly feels like a crime scene. They head upstairs. The target, an office on the second floor locked. A steel tool hits the door. Wood splinters. The frame bends. The lock gives. Inside, the room looks ordinary at first. A neat desk, framed photos, a vase of flowers, the kind of staged calm that says professional, responsible, safe. But investigators aren't there for appearances. They're there for what's hidden. A heavy safe sits where it can't be casually seen. Tools bite into metal. The process is loud, methodical, and when the safe finally opens, the mood shifts the way it does when suspicion becomes reality. Inside, sealed bricks of fentanyl, stacked with a grim efficiency. A firearm, a secured phone, items that don't belong in any hospital office, especially not one connected to patient care. Minutes later, the hospital's top administrator, 48 years old, still wearing a white coat, was led away in handcuffs. Staff stood frozen, eyes wide, words failing. In one morning, years of reputation collapsed into a single hallway walk. 9 years of alleged secrecy gone before sunrise. For years, the hospital looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Quiet waiting rooms, bright, spotless hallways, nurses moving with calm confidence, families relaxing the moment they saw a white coat and a reassuring smile. Nothing about the place suggested a threat. No street-level chaos, no obvious dealers, no warning signs that would make you turn around and leave. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because behind the polished front, investigators say a hidden operation was able to move through the building like it belonged there, blending into routine deliveries, supply carts, and standard paperwork. According to the case file, Shipments arrived on schedule and looked legitimate. Sterile gloves, surgical gowns, lab kits, sealed boxes stamped with the right labels. But some of those deliveries allegedly carried something else entirely: fentanyl and heroin concealed as medical supplies, disguised inside the very system people trusted. Staff, investigators allege, didn't call it drugs. They used a coded phrase: special weight loss medicine. Small white bottles circulated from room to room. They looked ordinary, they sounded routine, and they were reportedly administered to patients who had no idea what they were being given, each dose potent enough to put a person down, and each batch valuable enough to fuel a criminal business far beyond the hospital's walls. Then the finances started to tell a story the hallway smiles never would. Records reviewed by investigators allegedly showed ordering patterns that didn't match patient volume, inventory requests far higher than any normal medical operation would require, repeated deliveries at odd hours, and supply logs that were either suspiciously perfect or oddly incomplete. Midnight shipments arrived with paperwork that checked out on the surface, but inside, agents would later claim they found compact, sealed packages that didn't belong in any legitimate inventory chain. Meanwhile, life continued as usual for everyone on the outside. Parents brought kids in for routine care. Older patients came for blood work and follow-ups. Workers trusted the hospital with injuries and illnesses. People walked through those doors, assuming the system was designed to protect them. Investigators say a second business was running in parallel: quiet, profitable, and criminal, hidden behind clipboards, badges, and professional courtesy. The person in charge of the building wasn't just managing healthcare, they allege. She was managing a pipeline, using the hospital as camouflage and using patients as cover. Tap like if you believe this shouldn't be ignored. Comment, protect, if you think every hospital should face real scrutiny, not just a superficial inspection. But investigators say the most disturbing part wasn't the fentanyl. It was the allegation that the hospital learned how to make death look routine on paper. According to investigators, the victims were often people least likely to be missed or defended. Isolated elderly patients without active family advocates, unhoused individuals, and vulnerable emergency cases. People who could be labeled critical and quickly buried under procedure and bureaucracy before anyone had the chance to ask hard questions. The allegation is chilling, that a system was built to create the appearance of legality. Patients marked unstable on intake, prognoses documented within minutes, forms routed for rapid approval, 2 signatures, clinical and administrative, used to justify emergency decisions that should have required rigorous oversight, documented consent, and clear, independent review. Investigators claim many victims never regained consciousness. They also describe a restricted corridor absent from official layouts, leading to a sealed-off surgical space. Bright lights, metal tables, the kind of room that resembles medicine, but with none of medicine's purpose. Records, agents allege, reduced people to numbers, minimal identifying information, missing histories, no verifiable next-of-kin documentation, just entries that moved fast and left little behind. When analysts reviewed the paperwork, the volume of questionable activity reportedly raised immediate alarms. Repeated procedures over multiple years that didn't align with standard reporting trails, missing follow-up documentation, unclear end-of-life records, and gaps where death and release records should have been. And then, there's the alleged logistics. Investigators say recovered materials and shipping documentation suggested a cold chain process, refrigerated containers labeled as legitimate medical transport, blending in with ordinary hospital movement. If proven, it would show how something horrific could travel in plain sight, hidden inside the normal rhythm of healthcare, moved as if it were just another routine delivery. If the idea of an illicit organ network chills you, tap like so more people see this. Comment, never, if you believe every life deserves protection, no exceptions. Once the hospital administrator was in custody, agents reportedly believed the building was only the first domino. In federal command rooms, analysts assembled maps and link charts, clinics, storefront businesses, storage locations, and intermediaries across the state, all allegedly connected by the same patterns, the same vendors, the same shipment timing, the same paperwork signatures, the same financial routes. The directive was straightforward: move fast, move together, and don't let the network scatter. Before the sun went down, unmarked convoys rolled out. Vehicles took positions behind quiet buildings. Air support tracked routes without drawing attention. Teams hit multiple locations in rapid succession, aiming to prevent calls, warnings, and evidence dumps. At one private clinic, agents forced entry through a rear door. The waiting room was silent, chairs lined up, the calm of a place pretending to be normal. But investigators say the basement told a different story. locked refrigeration units, sealed containers stacked in rows, and a cold, controlled environment built for storage, not care. The labels on the containers read medical samples. But the air told a different story, an acrid chemical bite that didn't belong in any legitimate clinic. On a stainless table, surgical instruments sat arranged with intention, scrubbed clean, dried, and laid out like someone expected another procedure to start at any moment. Then the raids moved beyond medicine and into something closer to war. At a warehouse near the river, it wasn't quiet and clinical anymore. According to federal reports, armed men were already in position behind stacked crates, watching the entrances like guards on a perimeter. When agents closed in, the response was immediate gunfire, sharp and violent. Rounds slammed into metal shelving, concrete chipped, sparks burst from impact points along the doors. Agents dropped behind vehicles and barriers, communicating in short, controlled commands. No shouting for the sake of noise, no panic, just coordination. A flashbang punched through a side window, flooding the interior with white light and concussive pressure. For a beat, everything went still. Then the shooting stopped. Across the city, another team spotted a refrigerated truck trying to run. The engine screamed as it lurched forward, exhaust thick and angry. It tore through a gate and barreled toward the highway like it had one job: get out before anyone could look inside. Two federal SUVs surged after it and cut the angle, forcing the truck to brake hard. Tires shrieked. The trailer fishtailed, slid sideways, and finally locked in place. When agents opened the doors, they reportedly found two kinds of cargo, both equally damning: boxes stuffed with cash and sealed medical coolers packed for cold transport. Inside those coolers, investigators allege, were human organs wrapped in plastic, layered in ice, packaged like inventory. The arrests didn't stop there. At the home of a local officer, agents allegedly located bundles of cash concealed above the ceiling, money tucked into spaces designed to be overlooked. At the residence of a financial executive, teams recovered safety deposit keys and documents pointing to offshore transfers. Hour by hour, more names surfaced, more addresses, more warrants. By nightfall, dozens of people were in custody across the state. Evidence teams filled trucks with what they said the network depended on: narcotics, weapons, bank records, transplant-related files, shipping manifests, burner phones, hard drives. Tables disappeared under paperwork. Boxes stacked like moving day, except this move was toward indictments. And the raids revealed something worse than a single corrupt building. A hospital may have been the center point, investigators believed, but the operation had already metastasized. The walls that were supposed to protect life had allegedly been used to shelter a criminal enterprise, one that hid in plain sight behind professionalism and polite routines. Ohio woke up to flashing lights, sirens, and the persistent thrum of helicopters overhead. Overnight, the promise of safety felt compromised. People who had trusted the system were forced to confront a terrifying question: if it could happen there, where else could it be happening? By the second morning, officials no longer described it as a medical scandal. They described it as a structure, a coordinated system. And they believed the hospital administrator wasn't acting alone. To survive for nearly a decade, a network like that would require protection in layers: logistics, compliance, finances, and influence. Investigators say the files seized from the administrator's office weren't just lists of patients or vendors. They were lists of people with authority: public employees, enforcement contacts, financial gatekeepers, inspectors, and community figures' names written out, initials paired with numbers, coded references that suggested hierarchy. Payments, agents alleged, were disguised as consulting, special services, or even charitable grants. Legitimate-sounding labels meant to pass through audits without triggering alarms. And once agents followed the money, they said the route was both simple and brutal. Funds originated in hospital accounts. They flowed into non-profit foundations. From there, they disappeared into shell companies, entities with no real offices, no staff, no product, no visible purpose beyond moving money. The paperwork carried real signatures, people who, on paper, were supposed to uphold the community. That's what made it so chilling. It wasn't just contraband. It was permission bought, masked, and routed through respectable channels until accountability became harder to trace than the crime itself. A county judge had signed off on emergency medical transports that, according to investigators, were never subjected to meaningful review afterward. A city health inspector had placed official approval on late-night shipments that should have triggered follow-up questions. A police officer had allegedly removed entries from internal systems, cleaning up the digital trail after the fact. A banking executive had opened multiple safe deposit boxes under different identities. creating places to store and move assets without drawing attention. Each action, on its own, could look like paperwork, a procedural shortcut, an exception made in haste, something you could explain away. But together, investigators say, those small actions created something powerful, a protective barrier around the operation, a shield. To ordinary residents, these weren't shadowy figures. They were familiar names people introduced at fundraisers, applauded at community dinners, photographed shaking hands beside donors and hospital staff. They spoke confidently from podiums. They wore suits, uniforms, and credentials. In public, they were symbols of stability and trust. And behind closed doors, investigators allege, they authorized documents and approvals that allowed criminal activity to move through the system with the appearance of legitimacy. In the first 48 hours after the raids, officials said the number of internal investigations surged. Oversight offices that normally moved slowly were suddenly running at full speed. Government buildings that typically felt routine became tense and crowded. Judges were called in for questioning. Police leadership reopened case files they hadn't touched in years. Bank compliance teams began combing through transactions that had once been approved with little more than a signature and a timestamp. For many people, the most unsettling part wasn't the sensational details. It was the realization that the old assumption institutions protect the public now felt uncertain. A closed-door meeting was convened at the state capitol. The room filled quickly. Legislators, hospital executives, law enforcement leadership, oversight officials. The tone wasn't angry at first. It was heavy, like a room full of people trying to find solid ground after realizing the floor has been unstable for years. Many of them had known the hospital director personally. They had praised her leadership. They had issued certificates, written recommendations, publicly celebrated her work. Now, those same leaders sat facing the evidence recovered in the raids. Images of seized contraband, financial records, and materials investigators described as tied to illicit medical trafficking. What did we miss? Someone finally asked. No one answered. And the silence did more damage than any single explanation could. Because silence, in a room like that, sounds like doubt. It sounds like complicity. It sounds like fear. Outside the capital, the ripple reached the smallest towns. People opened their mail and found official bulletins. Church halls and community centers filled with older residents who wanted information and who spoke carefully, measuring their words as if naming the wrong person could bring consequences. Families compared stories. Dates, hospital visits, unexpected complications. The feeling that something never fully added up. In one meeting, a woman stood holding a printed photo of her husband. He had died at the hospital 5 years earlier. She asked a simple question. Were his records part of the investigation? No one could answer her directly. A volunteer handed her a phone number and a form to complete. That was all anyone could offer in that moment. Procedures, placeholders, and the slow machinery of a system trying to catch up to something it should have caught long ago. This wasn't the kind of fear people associate with street violence. It was deeper and more personal. It came from realizing that the people who wore clean uniforms, carried badges, and displayed diplomas on their walls might have chosen profit over duty. It was betrayal without spectacle. Betrayal typed into forms, stamped by officials, filed away neatly as if legality could be manufactured with ink. The raids didn't expose a distant threat. Investigators say they exposed something more disturbing, a network embedded inside the very structures designed to protect life. It wasn't an institution collapsing from outside pressure. It was an institution being hollowed out from within. News of the raids spread across Ohio like a winter front moving fast. It began with quiet radio updates at dawn. By midday, it dominated local television. At first, it sounded like standard law enforcement warrants served, evidence recovered, arrests made. But as more details surfaced, hospital leadership implicated, alleged secret procedures, narcotics, illicit medical shipments. People stopped what they were doing and stared at the screen, trying to process what they were hearing. Hospitals are supposed to be sacred spaces. They're where parents bring children for care, where families take elderly relatives when they can't manage alone, where life is protected, stabilized, saved. To hear that a hospital might have been used to exploit and destroy life felt, to many people, impossible. Phone lines jammed with calls. In small towns, older residents gathered at community centers to watch the updates together. Some recognized the director's face from news profiles and charity events. She had been admired. She had given speeches about expanding access to care. She had accepted awards in front of cameras. Now her image appeared on television in handcuffs. Some people didn't speak at all. Others cried. Some got angry not because they understood every technical detail, but because they understood the one thing that matters most in a situation like this. Trust is fragile. And once it breaks, it doesn't repair cleanly. In the bigger cities, hospitals went into crisis mode not with sirens, but with meetings. Emergency sessions filled conference rooms. Administrators pulled every file they could reach. Contracts, vendor agreements, donation records, partnership memos, anything that could hide a conflict, a false invoice, or a relationship no one had looked at too closely. Compliance teams started asking questions that had previously felt unthinkable. Doctors, who normally focused on charts and outcomes, started asking the kinds of questions that make a room go quiet. Could this happen here? Did we miss something? Were there signs we didn't want to see? And in the hallways between patient rooms and supply closets, nurses spoke in lowered voices. They replayed memories that had never quite settled. Cases that ended too quickly. Transfers that felt rushed. Patients who didn't survive when survival had seemed possible. They weren't accusing anyone out loud. They were doing something more unsettling, wondering whether something had been hidden in plain sight behind doors that were supposed to protect people. At Columbus's major logistics hub, federal teams slowed the flow of cargo. Shipments marked medical supplies were pulled aside. Containers were opened. Pallets were checked. Some loads were exactly what they claimed to be clean, ordinary, routine. Others raised red flags. Paperwork that didn't line up, serial numbers that didn't match, equipment that didn't correspond to any documented procedure or approved inventory list. Each inconsistency deepened the story, not because every box contained contraband, but because every mistake suggested confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from operating for years without expecting real scrutiny. City halls weren't ready for questions on that scale. Mayors stepped up to microphones facing reporters who wanted a simple answer. How did this happen? Cameras waited for certainty. What they got instead was hesitation, because the truth wasn't a single broken rule. It was a collective failure of imagination. No one wants to believe the person applauded at charity events could be tied to exploitation and greed. No one wants to imagine that a respected professional could be connected to violence with paperwork instead of a weapon. People prefer a cleaner story, criminals on the outside, institutions on the inside, safely separated. This story refused that comfort. In living rooms across the state, older residents spoke quietly, like the subject itself was fragile. Many of them remembered a time when institutions were trusted without discussion. Doctors were seen as heroes. Police were protectors. Judges were wise and untouchable. Now, they found themselves wondering whether something had changed, or whether the truth had simply been concealed for decades by the same polished rituals of authority. At one community gathering, a man stood up and introduced himself as a former hospital employee. His hands trembled as he spoke. He said he remembered late-night deliveries, boxes brought through rear entrances, moved quickly, handled with a seriousness that didn't match the paperwork. He recalled forms that didn't align with the shipments, signatures that appeared too easily, questions that were brushed away. At the time, he said, he assumed it was normal. He trusted the people above him. He didn't think he had the standing to challenge it. No one in the room blamed him. They understood something uncomfortable. Trust can function like a blindfold. And once it's on, it doesn't feel like blindness. It feels like belonging. It feels like this is how things work. Across Ohio, the same thoughts surfaced again and again, in different words but with the same weight. If it happened at one hospital, could it happen at another? That question traveled faster than the official updates. People looked differently at the buildings they passed every day. Clinics, pharmacies, nonprofit offices, charity programs, and realized how little they truly knew about what happened beyond the front desk. This wasn't only fear of crime, it was fear of deception. The danger, people realized, had not looked dangerous. It had been close, quiet, polite. It had smiled at fundraisers. It had donated to local causes. It had worn a white coat and spoken in reassuring tones. Ohio had weathered storms before economic storms, opioid storms, political storms. But this one felt different because it came from inside the walls that were supposed to protect life. Trust doesn't need gunfire to be destroyed. It can be shattered by signatures, by stamps, by silence, by official forms filed neatly away. By the third day after the raids, the state didn't feel the same as it had a week earlier. The tape came down. The convoys moved on. The evidence was cataloged and boxed. But the most important damage wasn't something agents could store in an evidence room. It was psychological, and it spread quietly. A low panic took hold, especially among older residents, the people who depended on routine checkups and trusted what a doctor recommended without hesitation. Suddenly, many of them felt exposed. Community centers started receiving calls. Is it safe to go to my appointment? Some seniors refused to leave home. Others told their children they would rather live with pain than step into another medical building. Hospitals felt the shock immediately. In a single morning, schedules collapsed. Dozens of elective procedures were canceled. Waiting rooms thinned. Staff noticed the difference in the air, not just anxiety, but suspicion. And once suspicion moves into a place that runs on trust, everything changes. Patients with cardiac issues began delaying procedures they'd scheduled months earlier. Families quietly checked relatives out of rehab and recovery centers, not because they had proof something was wrong, but because fear had made "what if" feel like evidence. Nurses spent entire shifts trying to calm people down, explaining that their facility wasn't involved, that protocols existed, that safeguards were in place. But the reassurance landed softly, if it landed at all, because the hospital at the center of the case had looked legitimate too. It had appeared polished, professional, and trustworthy right up until the moment it wasn't.
Nhưng ngay trong cộng đồng mình, cái cảnh giác ấy thường tự hạ xuống bởi vì người Việt hay tin vào hai thứ: lòng tốt và danh nghĩa. Lòng tốt của người đồng hương và danh nghĩa của ban tổ chức. Cái bẫy nằm ở đó. Tên Wi-Fi hiển thị trên điện thoại nhìn qua giống hệt kiểu đặt tên thường thấy trong các sự kiện. Nó không thô kệch, không kỳ cục, không có dấu hiệu của một kẻ cố tình dụ dỗ.
How do we know who to trust? Who signs the forms that decide our care? What else can be hidden inside a hospital? For many clinicians, the questions felt like accusations, even when they had no connection to the alleged crimes. Not because the community was targeting them personally, but because the profession itself had been wounded. The white coat had lost its automatic protection. Some doctors stood and tried to explain. They walked through oversight steps, consent requirements, chain of custody controls, audits, inspections, everything designed to prevent abuse. They spoke carefully and responsibly. They tried to put structure around fear. But fear doesn't respond to structure the way paperwork does. When trust collapses, facts don't rebuild it on their own. They help, but they don't heal. Not quickly. At the state capitol, the governor called an emergency press conference. His tone stayed controlled, but the tension around him was visible in every detail: the tight posture, the careful phrasing, the line of officials standing a half step behind him. He announced a sweeping statewide review. Hospitals, clinics, emergency rooms, private facilities, everything. Contracts would be audited, supplier relationships re-examined, compliance logs pulled and compared. Families would be given a hotline to report concerns and request information. Past cases that looked unexplained or unusual would be reflagged for renewed review. On paper, it was a serious response. But people watching from living rooms, assisted living facilities, and nursing homes felt a separate truth forming beneath the official words. An investigation can expose wrongdoing. It cannot erase the fear that has already taken root. Parents started questioning whether to bring children in for routine shots. Seniors began avoiding pharmacies or delaying refills. Church groups organized carpools not for convenience, but for safety, so no one had to walk into a clinic alone. And on local radio, hosts spent more time talking about the collapse of trust than the raid itself. Because the raid was an event, the loss of confidence was a condition. The initial shock faded. What remained was heavier. The realization that the threat, as the public understood it, didn't come from strangers in dark alleys. It came from a building people were taught to depend on, an institution designed to be safe by definition. Ohio had endured storms, floods, and economic downturns before. Those disasters came from outside pressure, visible forces, things you could point to and prepare for. This felt different because it seemed to come from inside, from systems that people assumed were protective. And that kind of wound doesn't close cleanly. In the end, the deepest damage wasn't only the contraband or the allegations or the headlines. It was the slow, painful recognition that safety isn't automatic, that it can be compromised quietly, that it can be weakened by approvals, stamps, and routine decisions that no one looks at twice until it's too late. When the sirens faded and the last evidence trucks pulled away, Ohio didn't return to normal. It woke up to something more enduring than any breaking news banner could capture. A sense that a sacred space had been violated. And with that came an instinct people couldn't ignore. Across the state, families pulled out old discharge papers, prescription lists, appointment summaries. They revisited memories of loved ones who declined too quickly, who passed with explanations that never fully satisfied. For many, this was the first time they understood how fragile trust can be and how easily a system built on trust can be exploited if oversight fails. The message that settled in wasn't paranoia, it was vigilance. Even toward institutions we're taught not to question. At the same time, people also looked for something solid to hold on to, some proof that accountability still existed. Investigators and federal task forces became the visible symbol of that effort. Teams following leads quietly, coordinating across jurisdictions, working long hours, and taking calculated risks so evidence could be secured and victims' families could get answers. Officials said the network was broader than a single building, spanning multiple locations and layers of logistics and finance. And the work, they emphasized, wasn't finished with one set of raids. It would continue through audits, prosecutions, and a long process of unraveling relationships that had been hidden behind professional titles and respectable reputations. Because justice doesn't end when the cameras leave. It continues when the public refuses to look away. It grows when people demand transparency and accountability. And it becomes harder to bury when stories like this reach every corner of the country. So if you believe people deserve the truth, if you believe oversight matters even in places we're taught to trust, share this story. Keep it visible. Keep the pressure on. Because silence is where systems like this survive. If you stand with justice, tap like so, this investigation reaches more people. Comment Justice for Ohio to keep this story in motion. Share this video so families stay alert and so no one else gets harmed by danger that can hide behind a hospital door. Because when everything is stripped away, one lesson rises above the rest. America is safest when its people stay informed, when communities demand accountability, and when those sworn to protect the public keep pursuing the truth no matter how well it's disguised.